Good morning. Good morning to those who are at home, those who are here. Worship was hot this morning. If I could have danced and not passed out, I would have danced this morning. And it would have been worth it. That was some good stuff. I'm so excited to be back after a 2-week break. Anybody enjoy the last 2 weeks? Yeah, you better give it up. Pastor Jason killed it. Woo! And now he's ready for a 2-week break. I'm going to list some things that I was taught when I was younger that I found out wasn't true. That I found out was fake. And don't be nervous. I know there's kids watching. I'm not going to talk about the sensitive issues. But there's some things I was taught that I found out wasn't true. How many of you were taught that you only use 10% of your brain? Now, in 2020, we found out that that was true for some people. But you're supposed to use 100%. You're supposed to use all of your brain. I was taught that red capes make bulls angry. Did you know that they're actually red-green colorblind? They don't even know what color the cape is. It's because that matador is waving it like he don't care, but the bull cares. That's what's annoying. I was taught that cockroaches would survive in nuclear fallout. That is not true. McDonald's fries will survive, but cockroaches will die. We have all believed things at a certain point in our life that we thought was true, only to find out later that it wasn't. But the worst lies are the ones we tell ourselves. The worst lies are the ones that we carry, the things that we carry like, my past will always haunt me. Or I would be happy if I had blank. Or my life is harder than everyone else. We all carry around lies. David prayed in Psalm chapter 119, verse 29. Keep me from deceitful ways. Be gracious to me and teach me your law. The New Living Translation puts it like this. Keep me from lying to myself. Keep me from lying to myself. This will be hard for some of us to believe, but our feelings are not always right. Our thoughts are not always accurate. Our perspective is not always justified, and our beliefs are not always on point. There are Christians who believe in the vaccine and those who do not. There are Christians who voted Democratic and those who voted Republican. There are Christians who believe in climate change and those who do not. There are Christians who hate candy corn, and then there's non-Christians. They cannot all be right. Our worldview is often like a carnival mirror. Our perspective can be distorted and incomplete. We don't always see things the way that God does. We don't always have that God perspective on things. This is why the author of Proverbs says in Proverbs chapter 14, verse 12, there is a way that appears right to a man, but in the end it leads to death. It appears right. It seems right. Ignorance isn't always bliss. Sometimes ignorance is blisters. Ignorance isn't always bliss. Sometimes it's blisters. I was at the gym when a guy came in. He was getting ready to do some deadlifts. He still had on his street clothes. He put on a couple plates. It was about 225 pounds. He went to lift it, but it did not budge. He had as much luck pulling his pants up that morning as he did lifting that bar. He was sagging real bad. He looked around to see if anyone else noticed. We did. Rather than take the few plates off, he decided to try it again. He raised it to the height of his ankles and shouted, "I did it." The only thing he did was ensure future back surgeries. Ignorance is not always bliss. One of the most dangerous things in the world is ignorance combined with confidence. One of the most dangerous things in the world is ignorance combined with confidence. Self-deception leads to self-destruction. Christians are not immune. History is full of people doing terrible things in the name of God. Recently, a woman drove down a suburb at 120 miles an hour with her 12-year-old in the car. She ran a red light. She hit a car. She ran into a house. And when she was asked why she did it, she says, I felt like I needed to test my faith, to let go and let God. The song, Let Jesus Take the Wheel, is a metaphor. He does not want to take your steering wheel. God doesn't want credit for stupid. Amen. Benjamin Franklin once said, we're all born ignorant, but you have to work hard to remain stupid. We know some people who work real hard to be stupid. Peace of mind does not mean peace with God. They are not the same thing. Guilt doesn't mean something's wrong, and peace doesn't mean something's right. You can have false guilt and have false peace. I have a friend who was told when he was little that it was wrong to stick up your middle finger, but he thought that applied to all fingers. So he was in Sunday school and they were like, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. He's like, that's wrong. You can't be lifting your finger in church. Carried false guilt. The reformer Martin Luther, on a much more tragic note, once wrote, here's a guy who influenced the church. He brought about the Reformation, had a lot of positive impact. But he wrote, if I had to baptize a Jew, I would take him to the bridge, hang a stone around his neck, and push him over with the words, I baptize thee in the name of Abraham. He should have had extreme guilt, but did not. It's easy to see the ignorance in others and a lot harder to see our own inner stupid. I've been reading a lot about blindness lately, and at first this isn't going to seem like it applies, but it does. I'm trying to understand what my wife deals with. I feel like there's a lot of ignorance when it comes to disabilities. Like the time when Ryan Seacrest tried to high-five a blind guy on America's Got Talent. Or the person who complained disabled parking should only be valid during the business hours of 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. I cannot see any reason why people with genuine disabilities would be out beyond these hours. A disabled person wrote back, we're disabled, not werewolves. Amen. In my search to understand, I've read Louis Braille, Helen Keller, Fanny Crosby, who wrote 9,000 hymns, including Blessed Assurance. A pastor once told her, I think it's a great pity that God did not give you sight. To which Fanny Crosby responded, do you know that if at birth I was only given one petition, it would have been that I was born blind, because when I get to heaven, the first person I'll ever see is Jesus. I've read every verse on blindness several times in the Bible. Did you know that God doesn't heal anyone in the Old Testament of blindness? Never happens. Turns water into wine, speaks through a donkey, brings water out of a rock, raises the dead, but no one's singing, Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound, I once was blind, but now I see. But Isaiah predicted a day would come when the blind would see. The first prophet to come on the scene and to touch the blind and to make them see was Jesus. And it is one of the most prolific miracles that happens in the Gospels, where he heals the blind over and over again. In fact, Jesus handed out 20/20 vision like a theater hands out 3D glasses. No one walked away from him blind. But out of all the blind people Jesus healed, only one of them is named, and his name was Bartimaeus. He's the last healing in the Gospel of Mark. And what is interesting about him is that he is the only one in the Gospel of Mark that refers to Jesus as Son of David while he's still blind. He sees something in Jesus that those with eyes cannot see. This is strategic. What the author is saying is that spiritual blindness is a whole lot harder to cure than physical blindness. We all struggle with blind spots. Jesus uses this miracle to show that we all desperately need him to open our eyes. Never assume that just because you love Jesus, that Jesus loves all of your ideas. 1/3 of the verses on blindness are all about spiritual blindness. And they're all about religious people, not non-religious people. People who are closest to Christ often got it wrong. They misunderstood the message and the miracles. He tells them 3 different times that when I die, 3 days later, I'm coming back from the grave. How many of them were camped around the tomb, waiting for him to come forth, roaring like a lion? No one. Hearing the message, but not understanding the message. Blind. Revelation chapter 3, verse 17 says, and this is speaking of a church, you say, I'm rich, I've acquired wealth and do not need a thing, but you do not realize that you are wretched, pitiful, poor, blind, and naked. This community of believers didn't have an accurate picture of themselves. They saw themselves with such confidence, but blind. And this is something most people struggle with. No matter how many personality tests you've taken, no matter how many peer reviews you've received, no matter how much self-reflection you've done, maybe you know who the first person was that said, know thyself, and no, it wasn't the Matrix. Maybe you're one of the few people that knows your blood type, but we all have blind spots. Benjamin Franklin once wrote, there are 3 things that are extremely hard: steel, diamonds, and knowing yourself. Knowing yourself. This is why David prayed in Psalm chapter 19, verse 12, but who can discern their own errors? Forgive my hidden faults. Who can discern their own errors? Forgive my hidden faults. When asked on a scale of 1 to 10, most people rate themselves as a 7. If you're Kanye West, it's an 11. We all struggle. Did you know that 8 out of 10 men think they are above average drivers? 8 out of 10 men think that. If you've ever seen Fast and Furious, you know that can't be true. There's a reason why insurance for men is higher than women. Men have more car accidents than women do, but we're real confident about it. 65% of Americans think they're more intelligent than the average person. Reality TV has shown that's not true. A lady talked about taking a bus ride home from work. It was a 45-minute ride. When she got home, she panicked because she realized someone had stolen her car. Just as she's getting ready to dial 911, she remembers she had driven her car to work that morning and taken the bus all the way home. And we're all guilty of those dumb moments. Pressing the elevator button over and over again when it doesn't go any faster. Calling a person and forgetting who you're calling. Any of you ever do that? You're like already like, oh shoot, I forgot who I'm calling. Saying you to the waiter when they're like, hey, enjoy your meal. Here's my favorite one. Going in for a hug when the other person's wanting a handshake. That was awkward. Romans chapter 12, verse 3. For by the grace given me, I say to every one of you, do not think of yourself more highly than you ought. Do not think of yourself more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourself with what? Sober judgment, in accordance with the faith God has distributed to each of you. I recently read a book about a guy who's blind, and he has climbed every one of the 7 tallest mountains, including Mount Everest. Completely blind, but has climbed all 7 of these mountains. As a kid, he still could see a little bit, but it kept diminishing more and more and more. And he tells a story from his childhood which helped him become resilient in spite of life's challenges. He showed his mom a quiz that he had taken at school. They were supposed to write down the names of each of the animals that were drawn on the piece of paper. And he came in and he was excited that he had gotten 100%, and there's this huge smiley face on it, and he's excited to show his mom, and his mom takes a look at the piece of paper and realizes that he didn't get any of them right. Frustrated, she goes to the teacher the next day and she's like, why in the world would you give my son a smiley face, give him 100% when he didn't get the homework done right? And she says, I've never worked with a blind kid before. I just wanted to give him some self-esteem. Says, my son doesn't need self-esteem. He needs to learn how to spell. Many of us surround ourselves with people who give us self-esteem but do not help us grow. We just want people to come around tickling our ear when we need someone to spank our rear. We've got too much stupid and we need someone to point it out. Right? Amen. My first car accident was because of a blind spot. All cars have them. I was in a church parking lot and I hit a pastor's car. Everything that bad that's happened to me in life, I'm sure, is traced back to that moment. That's like walking under a ladder, breaking a mirror, seeing a black cat run across. It's bad, In fact, I'm pretty sure there's a verse in Leviticus that says, hit a pastor and there will be disaster forever after. Blind spots are dangerous. Recently, I drove someone else's car, did not hit anybody, but they had this cool thing on their mirror. I've never seen this before, but it will let you know if someone's in your blind spot. It's got this little flashing thing that will let you know. And I was like, that is the coolest invention ever. We all need someone to be that mirror for us. To be that person who's willing to speak up and say, you've got something going on that just like a car, a blind spot is dangerous. Blind spots in your own life are not only dangerous for you, but everyone around you. We need someone to shine some light on those blind spots. Proverbs chapter 12, verse 15 says, fools think their own way is right, but the wise listen to others. Who are you surrounding yourself with who can speak into your life? If you're constantly surrounding yourself with people who think like you, then you all have the same blind spots. You need to surround yourself with people who can speak into your life. A little boy struggled with lying, so his mom brought him to the local priest. And the priest decided, I'm going to use some reverse psychology. And I'm going to tell a really big lie and see if the kid buys into it. So he says, last Sunday at Mass, I was sitting there and a 500-pound bear comes running into the building and it's coming down the aisle and it's getting ready to eat me. But fortunately for me, this puppy comes up, starts growling at the bear and all of a sudden grows to the same size of the bear, grabs it by its tail and drags it out of the building. And he looks at the little boy and says, do you believe that story? The little boy says, yes, because that dog was mine. The worst thing about blind spots is you can't see them. Whether it's a bad habit, a false belief, a character flaw. You see, there's cultural blind spots. When you look at history, you can see where whole cultures that we look back and we're like, how could they ever do that? There's a cultural blind spot. In Numbers chapter 33, verse 52, we read about a blind spot in the Old Testament. God tells the Israelites, he says, drive out all the inhabitants of the land before you. Destroy all their carved images and their cast idols. And listen to this last phrase. Demolish all their what? High places. Demolish the high places. Now, God wasn't like anti-heights, having a good view. There's something spiritual taking place here. The reason is at that time, people's reasoning was that if heaven is above, the higher up you go, the closer to God you must be, right? The idea is that if heaven's above us, the higher we go, the closer we are to God. It's where you can make a local call to God rather than a long-distance call. Humans still build places of worship on tall places like this Buddhist temple I'm going to show you. This is called the Tiger's Nest. It is 2,952 feet above the floor. It redefines giving God the highest praise. Trying to get higher in order to get closer to God. The same thing happened in Israel, but here's the deal. God told them where to worship, which was to be where? Jerusalem, at his temple. That was to be the place of worship, and so he told them to tear down these high places and to meet him in this location. And yet, over and over again in the Old Testament, you will see a repeated phrase which most of us ignore. It will say, a king did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, followed by the phrase, the high places, however, were not removed. Have you ever noticed that in the Old Testament? It happens all the time. In fact, I'm going to read a couple of them for you. But what I want you to realize is that God met and used these people despite their high places, despite their cultural blind spot. Listen to King Asa, 1 Kings chapter 15, verse 14. Although he did not remove the high places, Asa's heart was fully committed to the Lord all his life. Or King Solomon. Do you remember that scene where God comes to King Solomon and says, I'm going to give you any wish you want? How many wish that was you? God gives you one wish. He comes to King Solomon and says, I'm going to give you any wish. But if you notice the paragraph before that, you will notice that two things are said about him. One is that he marries the daughter of Pharaoh, which he was told not to do. And the second is that he had not torn down the high places. God blesses him in spite of this issue. I want you to hear something, that just because God's blessing someone's life doesn't mean that they are faultless. We make the mistake of looking at like TV preachers, or we look at different people's lives, and we're like, wow, look at how God has blessed them, man. They must be doing it right. No. God blesses us in spite of us. If God was waiting to bless us when we get it right, there would be none of us blessed, because we are all sinners. We have all fallen short of the glory of God. So when you look at church history, yes, the church has gotten it wrong over and over and over again, but it is the only tool that God has to work on this planet, and he has used it in spite of its foolishness, in spite of its stupidity. God has continued to use the church in spite of the church. It is not God's high five and saying, yeah, you got it right. It is because God is amazing. It is because God is awesome. It is because God is right. We are righteous even though we're not always right, because we have the blood of Christ, because we have Jesus. I want my life to say, I exalt thee, but I feel like I'm saying I exhaust thee. I don't always get it right. My life and faith often look like the dancing tube man they place outside of dealerships. You ever see these things? I got a picture for you. Their sole purpose in life is to dance, and they're terrible at it. No one's inviting them to a daughter-father dance. That's what my life feels like at times. I'm supposed to be Christ-like, but I feel Christ-light. 90% Dan, 10% Jesus. I always assumed that the older I got, the more spiritually mature I'd be. But I find that's not always true. I find that the longer I work with people, the more people annoy me. Can I get an amen? You start realizing how messed up we all are. You know, you get to see behind the curtain. And we struggle. I have Christ, but Christ doesn't always have me. He doesn't always have my thoughts, my heart, my attitude. We struggle with pride and bitterness and gluttony and greed. Did you know that John Calvin, another kind of big guy in the church, kicked a lady out of the church because she named her dog John Calvin? Now, I could see doing that if she named her cat John Calvin, but not the dog. I mean, come on. There's a reason why in the Catholic Church, when you're getting ready to take Mass, there's a prayer that you're supposed to pray. And actually, I really love this. It says, Lord, I'm not worthy to receive you, but only say the word and I shall be healed. I'm not worthy of this sacred moment, but because of Christ, I can come to you in wholeness. I can come to you in holiness. I can come to you in righteousness, not because of me, but in spite of me. Because we all deal with blind spots. And because this is true, we should be some of the most humble, patient, gracious people on the planet. Not because we have it right, but because we recognize the grace that God has shown us when we don't have it right. That when we see our blind spots, we're more tolerant of the blind spots of others. that God is still working on them. You see, we tend to, have you ever done that thing where you go and you wash your car, and when you come out, all of a sudden you notice all the dirty cars that are around you? Your car was dirty just a minute ago, but all of a sudden you're like, man, you need to go wash your car. You are only clean because of Christ. How dare you go around waving a finger at everyone else? They need Jesus just like you. They need Jesus just like you. And just as someone else had to pray you into the kingdom, they're waiting for you to pray them into the kingdom. I was reading through Isaiah chapter 42, verse 20. And there was a verse that just really just got my attention. It says, "You have seen many things, but you pay no attention." You have seen many things. You see, you can have information without transformation. Most Christians don't need more sermons, more small groups, or more Bible studies. We already know more than the Christians in the first century knew. You ever thought about that? The Bible was still unfolding for them. We already have the completed product. We already know more, but their impact was more. And the reason why is because we need more obedience and trust, less information. We need to do something with what we know. On the same day, I was at the store, and my son Caleb stops at this display, and he says, "I love those shoes." I'm going to show the picture. He says, "Man, I love those shoes." And his girlfriend turns around, points at my feet, and says, "You mean the ones that your dad's wearing?" Here's the next picture. I had been wearing those shoes for a month, and he had never noticed. Ironically, on the same day, my youngest comes up to me and says, "Dad, have you seen my backpack? Look at this picture." It was on his back, and he did not realize it. He was looking all around the house trying to find his backpack. How observant are we? Are we a Sherlock Holmes? Or are we Inspector Lestrade? Or the Pink Panther, the defective detective? On a BBC show, Stephen Fry, he's looking at this map, and it's World War II, and he's looking at this World War II map, and he's like, "Man, it's a barren and featureless desert out there, isn't it?" And the guy sitting next to him says, "You need to flip the paper over." He's looking at the back half of the map. There are times when God is trying to get our attention and we don't notice. Or we don't give the experience the weight that it deserves. I'm going to be vulnerable with you, and I'm going to share an experience because I want this to really come home for all of us. Recently, I was discouraged about writing. I had published a book a couple years ago, and I was discouraged about writing, and I told my wife, I said, "I think it's time that I'm going to give up writing any more books. It's just too much work. It's too much heart. I just don't want to do it anymore." Literally, that same day, I got a message from an editor who reached out to me and says, "Hey, I was just talking with my husband, and we were saying how much we loved your book, Reading the Cape. Keep sharing. People need your words." Now, it's easy to have those experiences and be like, coincidence. Or to have that experience and be like, "Oh, that's so encouraging." But it lasts for just a moment, and then we move into the next challenge or next headache or next heartache, and then what happens to that moment? It fades. The human mind holds on to negativity a whole lot easier than it does positivity. We can recall every bad thing that's ever happened to us, but trying to remember those God moments becomes very challenging. But a few days later, the moment starts fading. And we should be a lot more like Mary when she says in Luke chapter 2, verse 19, after having a God moment, it says, "Mary treasured up all these things and pondered them in her heart." She treasures them and she ponders them. And the question I want to ask you is, do you treasure the God moments? Do you dwell on the God moments? Do you let those moments be the light that helps you to keep moving forward? And this is what I wrote down. Do you know the story, or do you know the glory of the story? The word glory in Hebrew means weight. Do you feel the weight of that moment? Do you carry the weight of that moment? We all know about Christmas, but we don't all know the weight of Christmas. It doesn't shape what we do, or what we believe, or what we feel. We all know Easter. We've celebrated it year after year after year. But if we truly believed Easter, it would change how the church acts. It would change how the church moves. It would change what the church does. Do you know the story, or do you know the glory of the story? God knows that we struggle with spiritual amnesia, that we have blind spots, which is why he told Israel in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 9, and I'm going to wrap it up here. Only be careful and watch yourselves closely so that you do not forget the things your eyes have seen or let them fade from your heart as long as you live. Because the spiritual drift is going to be away from those moments towards negativity, complaint, doubt. Do you treasure those God moments? Don't let God moments fade from your heart. Let them shape your belief and behavior, your courage and character, your love and life. I want to close with a quote from Helen Keller. She says, "The only thing worse than being blind is having sight but no vision." I believe this is a message the church desperately needs. We all struggle with blind spots, and we need God to illuminate his light. But that requires us slowing down, spending some time on our knees, and allowing him to speak to us. Being transparent, saying, God, I know my ideas aren't always right. I know my feelings aren't always right. Check me before I wreck me. Speak to me. Help me.